Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, it's Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show for analytically minded marketers. We're coming today with another analytics topic. Let's get straight into it. We all want our organization's decisions to be driven by the numbers. It's a no-brainer. Who wouldn't want to have at their fingertips analytics that accurately shows which course of action will be the best? But doing this takes analysts. That doesn't mean just hiring them. It means managing them to function well. It means creating processes for them, outfitting them with technology, giving them budgets. It's hard pulling this off in a small or a mid-sized organization. And even leaders of large organizations must exercise care when creating this. But there's no set-in-stone law that says a data team must be in-house. Another model, managed services, has worked well in IT for years, and it can be used to give companies access to analysts too, so that they can still be data-driven. We're going to explore the outsourced analytics model with today's guest. Throughout his career, he's worked in the middle of data, business, and strategy. He got his bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Following graduation, he joined Cargill as a data engineer. And then, in 2013, he went on to serve as the analytics lead at consultancy Slalom, where he claims to have been Minneapolis's first analytics hire. In 2017, he co-founded Data Drive, a managed services provider specializing in analytics. Let's go talk with Luke Komiskey. Luke Komiskey, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thanks for having me.
I am glad that we can delve into a topic where we explain to people the background stuff that has to happen for people to have information at their fingertips to make good sales and marketing decisions. Let's start by explaining what we don't like to see people doing. You, I'm sure, have come across a lot of companies that are in Excel hell. For once and for all, tell us why we need to get out of Excel hell if we still think that we're wise to be using spreadsheets to manage our data.
It's super easy for organizations to start out with the spreadsheet approach using Excel. I think there's just a level of comfortability and just general awareness of Excel being a tool that could store a decent amount of size of data. I think what I see when we go into organizations that really are just drowning in spreadsheets, it's because the volume of data has become so much so that these Excel, often macro-laden spreadsheets are just crawling through trying to get data and meaningful insights exposed for end users. And often what organizations run into is that it becomes a full-time job for people that were hired for other purposes to have to update manually all of these spreadsheets. Oftentimes when we find in like media marketing functions is that data is never totally up to date. So there's a little bit of a trust issue that starts to arise, and then versions can often get out of control. And so it becomes a monster of its own, and it can take on full-time resourcing that you may not have intended as on your route to make more data-driven decisions.
Yeah, very good. The only thing I would add to that for people who step back and think about it, a spreadsheet will conflate the items that are the values, the actual data values, with the transformations that it takes to arrive at those values, right? So that classic, I just need another column here to make a formula that takes the number that I don't find helpful and transforms it into a format that I do find helpful. Great, but now someone else is going to have to dig through your spreadsheet to figure out how you did that. And what if it breaks? What if you stop doing it? You don't drag it down to every value on that spreadsheet. So it's very messy from that standpoint. no matter the fact that it was very easy to begin with. So that it's deceptively easy to begin, but extremely hard to move out of.
Yeah, well said.
So, the more modern way of doing this, and this is something that listeners to this show will know because we've had no fewer than half a dozen episodes looking at it from different angles, is a modern data stack. We're using the magic of APIs to pull data out of their source platform. We are doing some kind of transformation on them, loading them into some kind of, usually a cloud repository, and then we are connecting that up to something that does the visualization. If we're looking at all of that, I guess my question for you is, Luke, does that always go smoothly, or are there some aspects to setting that up that people must be aware of? Otherwise, they may end up with a royal mess on their hands.
Yeah, it can be again a deceptively easy initiative to try to take on.
Okay.
Technology today it's never been easier to be able to pull all of this data wherever it may be located into a centralized spot. Advancements in cloud storage and all of the modern data stack technologies have made it easier than ever, oftentimes, to use click and drag technologies to bring all of this together. But as any initiative goes, like, the devil is in the details of how are you thinking through more of a longer term structure and the automations of getting that data into a usable format. Much like how people who have set up spreadsheets have had to do manual steps to massage and transform the data, those same activities can be done at a much larger scale and automated in a modern data stack, and that's the big benefit of it. But you still need often specialized skill sets to be able to engineer these tools to work for the nuances that will exist in anyone's business.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I think where you're going is that it's not merely enough to have raw information. Um, yeah, sure, we can push data wherever we want now, but, and you've said this at other times, that to receive useful insights, we need something else. You said we need a business logic layer that expresses how that data is used and valued by each of our companies. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, there's this whole layer that we often call transformation, but it's really just simply around applying some of the business logic, the aggregation. It's taking raw pieces of data that it continues to increase in volume and actually making it analytically useful in an end user report or whatever that format's going to look like. There's a lot of work that has to go into taking all of this granular data sets, providing the aggregations, understanding some of the nuances of maybe how even the business application that you pull data from is handling that data. It may not be 100% matched to how you may want to present it to internal teams or present it to your customers. And that's where that benefit of this, like, transformation layer to massage the data to make it actually useful to drive decisions off of that. I mean, that's the
Yes.
ultimate goal.
Yeah, I'll stop you right there because that was such an important point you made. We can't, and especially remembering that some of these systems are 10, 15, 20 years old, or maybe older, they didn't take our reporting needs into account when they first decided to store the data inside of their application.
Yes, very, very much so. And how they store it from a transactional perspective is just quite different, to your point of how you need to use it for aggregating up from an analytics perspective. It's two different lenses, all valid, but all of the software is mostly built around the transactions your people need to take within it, and not necessarily how valuable it's going to be on the insights engine.
So give us an example of that kind of aggregation. Like, would I be on the right track if I looked at, let's say, a stream of ads and ad data? So maybe they were registering each click and showing us the price paid for each of those clicks. That's probably not useful to us if we're looking at, let's say, a year-long trend. So what kind of aggregation are we going to see in that or other kinds of areas that we need to do so that we can actually get some insights out of it?
Yeah, the power of analytics. I mean, it for sure there are insights that can be gleaned at more of those granular. Somebody clicked on an ad, we ran this type of campaign, but the real power comes from being able to take a little bit more of a longitudinal view on your data. And so, while it's important to understand where impressions come from, where clicks are coming from, what is the cost within a campaign, what can be more interesting is to think about all of the attributes around when we're running campaigns, where we're running campaigns, and some of the little details, but and being able to roll that up into a much more aggregated view. And so the easy dimension always is things like time, being able to see seasonality when certain media marketing spend might make more sense. But there might be some other unknown variables that are interesting to take a look at. I think about one example we worked with even just a non-marketing example of working with a pizza chain that was trying to use data to determine when to schedule delivery drivers. And they were taking advantage of weather forecasting to figure out when would it make sense for us to bring in a lot of delivery drivers or maybe scale back on some of the hourly schedules for delivery drivers that they're bringing in. That's a really fascinating use case to do like real-time resource allocation or maybe even like reconfigure media marketing spend based off what you see coming down the pipe.
I love that. So the prep there is going and grabbing other data sources, the weather you mentioned, and thinking about what questions would we have in how we run our business where these kind of answers would have the greatest impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think many organizations still today struggle with even just getting a handle of the data that they're creating themselves. Of course, it's really cool to think about these external data sets and you can enrich some of your insights by finding patterns by overlaying these external data sets. But many organizations need to take that first step of taking stock of all the internal data points that their teams are already creating and be able to have a good picture of what happened yesterday before we even get to that level of predicting what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. To crawl, walk, run, of course. Would you say that this is, I don't want us to get too far ahead here, but people might be imagining dashboards at this point that are showing the information. Is the kind of data that you're talking about and kind of figuring out what these top business questions that we need answered are, is this automatically going to also be the way that our dashboards appear? Or do you keep them separate and try to first figure out, let's ask those questions so we know what data needs to be on hand, but let's not gallop along yet to imagining what dashboards look like?
Yeah, a big part of any good data strategy and just initiative is to understand what does success look like for a data initiative, because it is incredibly easy to get stuck within just analysis paralysis of the the insights you could be trying to deliver out of it. And so before we even start talking about the vehicle, whether it's the dashboards or an embedded portal or even just a Excel spreadsheet that's emailed to somebody on a Monday morning, it's more important to understand, all right, if this decision maker had this data in hand or this data to play around with any kind of format, what kind of decisions would they be able to make off of that? And how would we know that this investment we're making in data is successful? That the ROI of data is probably one of the toughest conversations that organizations are trying to grapple with, particularly right now, because it's easy to get lost in the fun technology and potentially lose sight of why are we doing this to begin with? And we want to make sure we're very clear on that.
Right. And that's not an easy business case until you start kind of looking at the negatives that you could be avoiding. So you talked about, maybe having a surplus of drivers on hand for a pizza chain, paying them when there's no work. There are ways that we can start to imagine how being blindfolded, as it were, and making decisions that we make right now is having a cost impact. And we may, by making better decisions and having better data, not make those same decisions and save money. Would that be an example?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that type of example. And a common one now too that I see is, how do we unlock that institutional knowledge, those gut decisions that senior leaders are making today, and how do we turn that into a scalable process? So one, for planning for eventually, them moving on from that role, but number two, to empower midline, frontline workers to be able to make those same decisions without necessarily having to rely on a key person to make that.
I'm glad you raised that. And if we could expand it, we're not just talking one key area. If we think of how, let's look at sales and marketing, for example, there's one customer, but there are many groups that have touch points with that customer, and each one of their systems tells a piece of the story. So do you have any tips for, maybe avoiding the political pitfalls of people who don't want to share their data, or people who are in a rush and don't want to also, include data from other systems? They don't think it's important. And again, we're trying to say, but your customer is going to, the story of your customer interactions will be told across all of these platforms. How do we handle that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a critical piece when it comes to the media marketing customer journey, is that there is a lot of different touch points, a lot of different data points that you can use to measure the effectiveness of any campaign that you're running. And I mean, this all goes back to where the solution of just burying yourself in spreadsheets and trying to, oftentimes people are kind of thinking through what is the effort it's going to take for me to pull this additional data into this really convoluted spreadsheet ecosystem that I have, where I think the benefit can really come into play about being able to move quick with your customers is tapping into those automations, integrations to pull that data in easily, because then you can get more of a holistic picture. You can even start to look at the data more holistically across multiple customers. I mean, that's not a customer specific view, but for your own internal knowledge of your team, to understand the effectiveness of certain media spend would be really enlightening, because you're kind of in that unique position to have a multi-client view that in a vacuum, in a spreadsheet, you might not be able to see.
Truly, some of the value that we get out of serving the next customer will come from what we figured out in serving customers in past. But to do that, we have to go looking. It's not just going to, tap us on the shoulder and tell us. I want to delve more into what it takes to do those things. But before we do, we're going to take a really short break. Let me step away for a second to note our social media presence. On social, you'll see show-related updates about our guests. You'll see what's happening behind the scenes. Or you can simply talk to me. There are already 740 people who have connected with the show's social pages. And I've really loved how lately a few of you have posted positive comments about the show. It encourages me in making this podcast the best it can be. So find Funnel Reboot on LinkedIn or Instagram or X. Click follow and maybe say hi. Thanks a lot. Let's get back to the show. All right, Luke. So I'm going to pick up at that point that you made about the ROI of data and how we can think about the different choices that must be made by someone to be able to have this data where it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be, and giving the insights that it's supposed to. So let's boil down a little bit of this process here. We're lucky to be in an age where we have different vendors and that these tools don't need to be built from scratch. There was a time when they did, and I'm glad those days are gone. Let's start talking about where we need to go and get these pieces of information with an ELT platform. So extract, translate, and load, or extract, load, and translate, depending on how people view it. Can you talk to me a little bit about what these services do and what we need to know about them?
Yeah. So ETL, ELT tools are, as you mentioned, it's that acronym for extract, transform, load. And the big functionality that they provide is they are I call them the data Sherpas that are moving data from point A to point B. It's essentially the data plumbing behind the scenes that is bringing the data out of these transactional applications and into a better landing spot for analytical reporting. Key reason being is that you don't want to necessarily be running analytically intense operations directly off a system that would be a transactional system. If you were in any kind of industry that was like high volume transactions, it's good to decouple that. And I'm sure, as we'll talk about too, is just having a spot to actually transform and model and reshape the data.
Yeah,
Better to do that elsewhere.
sure. So, right. So people need to think about having a copy of their data that's available just for things like reporting. Um, so some of the tools out there, I mean, they range in cost, but what I've seen, and I'd love your impression, is most of them have in common that they are available at a tiered pricing, and that for each tier you're going to get so many rows of data, and it climbs up into the millions. The the thing that I note is they all have that in common. What they seem to differ on is how many different systems they connect to. Some are rather niche and only connect to a few, but then there are others that have connections to almost anything you can think of. Um, Anything that you want to add, or how you like to look at those, or you can even kick out one or two that you consider to be, you know, great sources for ELT solutions.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you'll find as we talk through this whole concept of the modern data stack is every single layer we talk about will have a lot of different tools to pick from. I think it's uh, what has occurred over the past few years is a ton of vendors are really trying to carve out what is a specific space they want to play in. But what that leaves us as customers with is a lot of different options on how we could piece together our own version of a data stack. And so, yeah, you're spot on about the pricing of it. It is often usually charged by either how many rows you're pulling across, how long that machine is actually running behind the scenes, and then there are a few that will be priced just based off like how many unique connectors you're using across the board. I think the key thing for anyone that's like researching ETL ELT solutions is to first come into that conversation with what are the current high priority data systems that I need to connect to, because even in the ELT space you can choose the buy option and use some of these ETL vendors that are already sitting out there and they've got their portfolio of connectors that are big and small, or you can do a build approach where you can actually build out your own custom API calls and put them on a schedule. Obviously, a lot more technically involved, but cheaper in the long run.
Excellent. Well put. I don't think the discussion on the build your own is complete without mentioning that systems will change their library, will change the version of the API that they use. So I'll pick LinkedIn, for example. So LinkedIn will come out maybe every few quarters with a new version of their API, and they'll start to give you the sunset notice on their old API. So what somebody who has built their own API has to do in that period of time is, imagine that the starter's pistol has gone and that they have now a short window of time to rewrite their API to talk with the new format of the data and make sure that that is completely working in production by the time the old one is phased out. Tell me if you agree or disagree, but that to me is what you've got to do if you're building it. Now, if you're buying, that's the job of your ETL provider. They've taken that on. But tell me if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that is often like the unseen headache that happens behind the scenes with every modern application has a API or should be or is creating an API access to it, but there are no standards on how well those things need to be documented, how often they can or should change, and that is part of the Wild West we find ourselves in with ELT.
That's a very good point. Okay, we were already hinting at the fact that this data has got to go somewhere, and so people normally hear the phrase data warehouse. They may also hear, the fact that some of these are now in the cloud. I don't know many that are still arguing for an on-premise data warehouse. Maybe if there's certain privacy concerns. But what can you tell us about which ones these are, and maybe name a few, because there are some gargantuan ones out there.
Yeah, this has been a huge space. So the whole cloud data warehousing space, and really the quick elevator pitch on why data warehouses even exist is it is synonymous with that term of one source of truth. It is the one place that you're landing data, modeling data, and making it available and useful for analytics reporting. These are the storage layers where that copy of the data is sitting, and you can do some pretty amazing things out there. As far as kind of the big vendors in this space, the ones that you'll often hear about are the big vendors right now are Snowflake and Databricks are the two going head to head with each other. The original was AWS, Amazon Web Services, was the one that largely spearheaded this whole shift to the cloud. And then other players are Microsoft Azure, as well as Google Cloud Platform, Google BigQuery.
Sure. So can you just break apart for us? I suppose some people might think that Snowflake and Databricks are also data sources, because sometimes people hear about how they will be bolted onto, let's say, a website or something to retrieve data. Are they doing the same thing, or are they offering a slightly different solution than your stock AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure?
Yeah, they're for the vast majority of non-data professionals, they're essentially doing the same thing. There are slight structural, maybe philosophical framework approaches that they take with how they necessarily store the data. But really, if in the Snowflake versus Databricks versus any other vendor discussion, they're all essentially storing and maintaining different data sets, different price points, different models, different philosophical approaches. But when you hear people talk about Snowflake, Databricks being a source, it is often from a front end report developer saying, this data that you're seeing in this report is being sourced from our data warehouse / data lake behind the scenes, and then any one of the vendors that I just described.
Right. So now let's get to how they charge.
Oh boy, yeah. Again, it's still kind of the wild west of pricing. Many of them are charging based off of kind of two factors. There's the computational aspect of your workloads, as well as your storage cost. By and large, the storage cost is relatively negligible. Every year that passes, storage gets cheaper and cheaper. But the real driver behind pricing on these things is how much horsepower, firepower, basically how much the computer in the cloud is working behind the scenes to either move data into it, transform data within it, or push data out of it. And they often will charge based off how long and how beefy those CPUs are behind the scenes.
Very well put. I think one place where people get caught unawares on this is finding out, let's say after a month, that when they handed off a dashboard to someone or many people, and those people are opening those dashboards, each time they are opening them, if it's configured this way, that dashboard will be refreshing and going straight back and demanding more compute from that data warehouse. And this can drive your cost up, right?
Absolutely. And this is where the benefit of a experienced cloud data architect or a data engineer really comes into play. Because it's very easy to get started with many of these tools. Sometimes you can even load up all of your data into a warehouse, get it into a reporting platform without ever writing a piece of code. The downside of that is you could potentially be unknowingly leaving a beefy warehouse behind the scenes running 24/7 on something you really didn't need. And a month later, you're going to be looking at that credit card bill and be like, what did I just do?
Yeah. For, people who want a less technical explanation of that, maybe a comparison with cars. If you closed your eyes and said, I don't care what kind of car I have, it's got to be able to get over any terrain, and I need to be able to, put a lot in it. Somebody will hand you a Hummer. There, a Hummer will do, right? Before we even see where we're going or how much we need to carry, we know that'll do. And it's until you say to them, yeah, but I actually want the fuel economy of a Prius. So those two are completely different. But so, Luke, just to reinforce your point, the architecting of what are we prepping for? What might the user or users need out of this? Those questions ought to be asked up front, because they will have a market change on the design of the final product. And we all want to end up with something that's going to do what we need, not too much more, not too much less, right?
Yep. Yeah, and a big conversation I always run into is many organizations envision this real-time analytics use case to be able to see the sales with, the revenue in their business at a moment's notice. And what people don't appreciate is achieving that type of real-time analytics is incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
As opposed to, could you get by with every hour, every day? Would that be directionally correct enough? And many people will say yes, and that is astronomically cheaper than a real-time use case.
Yeah, that curve on the line from 95 to 98 to 99 to 99.9% timeliness. We pay for all of the ends of that curve. So we need to decide how much we can back it away.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about visualization. We're coming into the thing that will actually be seen. We're moving up from that stuff that's under the plumbing, and now maybe we're looking at the vanity on top with our sink and our fixtures and our mirror. What types of visualization tools are out there, and do you have things that maybe make a visualization tool bubble to the top for our needs?
Yeah, for sure. And what I've loved about being in analytics over the last decade, there's definitely been this huge surge in popularity around just the power of data visualization. The whole concept that you are able to view a lot of different data and be able to visualize and glean out insights that you might not necessarily see in a spreadsheet that's full of a million rows of information. That this is why there's been such an explosion of the concept of self-service analytics and data visualization and interactive dashboards. There's again, like many of these layers within this data journey, there's a lot of different options to pick from. They all, in many ways, achieve the same outcome. Just again, much like data warehouse vendors, just slightly different philosophical or frameworks on how you get to that outcome. Some of the popular ones in the industry are ones like Tableau, Microsoft Power BI, Google Looker. Those tend to be the three that I would probably run into the most. But as you can imagine, there's many other vendors out there taking slightly different approaches to all of that.
Yeah. And, let's mention, and you already did kind of hint at it, which Silicon Valley giants each one of these are housed within. So just to go back to it, so Power BI, that's Microsoft. You already mentioned Google Looker Studio, clearly with Google. And then who owns Tableau?
Tableau is now owned by Salesforce.
Any practical impact, benefit, detraction on Tableau being in Salesforce in your eyes?
Yeah. And so for context for the audience too, I have quite a bit of long history working with Tableau, started as a Tableau developer. What I've always loved and appreciated about Tableau is that it hasn't been mega Silicon Valley vendor specific, that a lot of their go-to-market approach has been around building connectors into other applications, regardless of being part of the Google, Amazon, or Microsoft umbrella. What I've appreciated about the Salesforce acquisition, I don't think I could personally ask for a better acquisition partner than Salesforce, just because it is a tech giant that isn't necessarily in the tech space, much like a Google or a Microsoft would be.
Yep.
And at the same time, there is, I think, a cool edge for Tableau now is that it is directly connected to the Salesforce ecosystem. Obviously, a lot of people are using Salesforce as their CRM system. But of course, with any acquisition that goes on, there's just a lot of growing pains or merging that needs to take place to like bring it in. But I still love that Tableau can be an independent line item on Salesforce's business model.
Yeah, and let's be clear. Neither you nor I have a crystal ball, nor are we trying to give long-term, forward-looking advice. In the tech world, they call these safe harbor statements. But what I'm saying is that, a tool like Tableau could have been sold to a Google or a Microsoft, and the first question would be, will it survive on its own, or will it be merged together with their competing offering? So yes, the fact that we have several to choose from is good, but it is always wise to keep an eye on where these things reside, what the development path looks like for them. So I'll name one that's in the Google ecosystem. We've said it began as Data Studio, but it's now known as Google Looker Studio. And Looker, the name, comes from the fact that there's another product in the governance and visualization space, which Google bought, and they've put it together. And it's just known as Looker. And then we have this other product that they built on their own, Looker Studio. And the jury is out on whether those two are going to continue on separate paths. So this is why I raise this. This is important for us to realize that a data stack, when we are making these choices, or even if we're outsourcing to others and these choices were made by them, this is something we have to be mindful of. The terrain is always shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that summer of 2019 when Google acquired Looker and Salesforce acquired Tableau. It was all within a month of each other, right? There was just, you hit these spaces where big acquisitions are happening. And I would even forecast over the next year and a half with just the economic environment we find that I think there'll be more of those happening now.
There could be. You have said it, and I would endorse it, that the aim of these tools to try to stay as agnostic as they can. I think they'll probably end up saying, look, if you need information from one of the tools that's already in our ecosystem, like Google Analytics to Google Looker Studio, that is the most economically and the most integrated of the connections. If you're looking for something that's outside, we will still support that because we know that so many of our users are using non-Google tools as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So I there's an element of trust here with those tools, that for them to be the best for their users, that agnosticism needs to stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially now when you see now AI getting injected into all things, having the benefit of a parent company, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, that has the resources available to be able to integrate AI capabilities lightning fast. I mean, that's where the benefit of being able to shift and move and groove with a changing dynamic is really coming to play. All three of these vendors, I think, are releasing AI capabilities this year.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on what we might be noticing in these tools as AI gets further integrated?
Yeah, I think the big thing, what I think about often as a data professional, is how people are going to expect or want to consume insights. 10 plus years ago, I think people were comfortable with Excel spreadsheets or reporting tools that made it look like as close to an Excel spreadsheet as possible. Over the last 10 years, people have really leaned in on self-service analytics. Building dashboards, exploring the data through visualizations was a pretty profound way to get to insights. I think the next step we will see as an entire data industry, and not just data, but I think people want to chat GPT with their data. Yeah. And how we can get to a spot where people can ask questions and have whatever that product looks like, whether it's a sentence or a visual, needs to be auto-created by AI. I think that's the natural next evolution that consumers are going to expect of their data.
I'm personally eager for the put text in, get a chart out era. And yeah, I mean, I'm also a Star Trek fan, so I'm kind of picturing we're all just going to be, just like they talk to the ship, right? And the ship just talks back and says, "Oh yeah, here you go. Here, I can show you that."
Right, absolutely. Yep.
Right? We,
And you
we
and
might
you
be there fairly soon.
Yep. Yeah, you throw in an Apple product and we got ourselves a Minority Report.
Oh my goodness. We really could. Let's talk about I don't want to minimize what those visualization tools do because they're not just showing us a chart. They're handling how that information is getting distributed. You
Mhm.
already mentioned multiple account, like if we're in an agency and we're trying to distribute things to each one of our customers that we have campaigns for. So help us appreciate, that sort of thing and the fact that people may want to see data in slightly different ways or drill down on the data
Mhm.
that is presented in the first screen they see. uh, these tools have to do more than just throw up a static chart.
Mhm. Yeah, it's easy to get excited and lost in all the technical sophistication that has to go on behind the scenes, but any data analytics investment initiative is going to live and die by the ability for end users to adopt and actually use these products. To keep in mind that any data goal is to make sure that when people make decisions that they are making decisions that are hopefully grounded in some respect to the data behind the scenes. And what I love about data analytics is like what we've talked about so far is very like technical, but then once you get to the front end, you really have to start thinking about the user experience and the customer journey, even going into a reporting and a data product. And so, what I love about where these tools are at today with data visualizations, interactive data products, is that there is a lot of UI design, data visualization best practices that has to go into it. And then
Mm,
also be thinking about the medium of delivery, that recognizing that not everyone may feel comfortable about signing into a web portal. Some people are just have been trained to live in their inbox or receive a
right.
PDF report, and any tool, any approach has to be able to meet people where they're at. A large part of what we talk about in our company is the last mile of analytics and meeting people at their level of data maturity, that they are willing to use the data to actually drive a decision.
Yeah, very well put. um, there may be a cost component to this too. We shouldn't leave the topic of visualization without mentioning how they charge for those tools. So, do we need to keep in mind how many seats there are or users? Is there, a difference between letting somebody have that login versus just spitting out a PDF and emailing it? Help us there.
Yeah. Yeah, many of these vendors will charge based off seats, so number of users that need to be identified by unique email. So you often, in terms of pricing, are thinking about the number of unique humans that need to receive insights. I think as there's been a huge influx and growth and popularity around this concept of embedded analytics, and even around another term called data monetization. So this concept that
Hmm.
the data that you're sitting on actually might be even incredibly more valuable for people outside of the four walls of your organization. What is a cost effective way to be able to deliver to a potential audience size that could be 1,000 plus people? And so many of these vendors are now either making available a new pricing model or shifting their pricing models to be less focused around identifying unique humans. That's still the most popular way of charging, but now moving towards usage-based pricing. But it can be really complicated to think about what counts as using a report.
Yeah, but I love your point that left to our own devices, we may try to think of this only as a cost center and squeeze it down to the minimum. But if we expand our thinking and instead say, wait a minute, maybe our clients want to have this data. Maybe they want it so bad they will actually pay a surplus on top of what we already provide them to have this data. There's many different ways that we can actually grow it. So your point is well taken that our data could be a product. It could be something that we want to put in the hands of others, not just something that we want to be miserly with.
Mhm. Yeah, incredibly powerful concept to switch data into a revenue generating asset. That's not something we've often talked about as data professionals. So one, that is a really cool concept. And I had a second point, but I will leave it till it comes back to me.
Yeah, that's fine. So we've got kind of those thoughts of, all right, if I'm distributing to multiple accounts, if I'm distributing to outside users, if I'm even distributing to brand new audiences who have been salivating over having this data, but we've never given them that chance, that we should just think about those things.
Yep.
Luke, when we're trying to figure out whether we build versus buy, you've been hinting throughout here that key decisions need to be made on architecting, on choice of tools, on how we make this how we maintain it and keep it growing over time. There are normally people who have to do this. So regardless of which decision we have to make, we need to realize that there are people who have expertise here. Those people need to be paid. And this really helps us in our decision making on the build versus buy. Tell us a bit more of kind of how within your firm you staff up to be able to accommodate people's data needs.
Yeah. So traditionally, when people are looking to build out data analytics capability, they might think about it from a build perspective. Of course, they have all of the decisions around the pieces of software that we just got done walking through, but then also making sure that you've got the right skill sets internally to be able to handle every single step of the direction. What I think most organizations maybe don't fully appreciate is that there's actually a lot of different career paths within data altogether. And so many organizations may start out with a job post that's around a data analyst or a data scientist. But there are many other skill sets around being a good data engineer, a data architect. And this really gets into around being experienced in every step of the direction and making sure that your data initiative can be successful. What we've found is that it can be difficult to bring in a headcount of one and expect them to be the unicorn that is going to bring that end-to-end data capability in place. So what our organization provides is managed analytics services. What it really looks to capture is organizations that are thinking about building out a data capability, but may either feel overwhelmed by all of the different tool selections, or maybe don't even want to think about all the different tool selections that need to be in place. But then also providing that ongoing support, a fractional data team that consists of the engineers and the scientists and the analyst, so that an organization doesn't necessarily need to go out and have to hire these expensive, nuanced skill set type people. There's less risk in having a provider that is providing that end-to-end data into your organization. And of course, your organization gets to continue to use that as a strategic asset, both internally or a revenue generating asset externally if they so choose.
Very well put. So, and I thank you for those listening who have been involved broader decisions for their businesses, particularly businesses with offices and office equipment. I heard you say the words managed and service and provider. For people who have ever used a IT managed service provider or MSP, this is going to sound very familiar. It's following along on we'll keep everything running. We will grow with you as you grow. But you focus on your business. We'll focus on knowing how to keep this stuff working. Is there anything else you'd like to add about how Data Drive does this for customers?
Yeah, I think beyond just having the fractional team available and keeping the platform up, what I really love about our role within organizations is oftentimes we get to sit in the role of, call it chief data officer, but if anything else, being able to sit in leadership meetings and understand the vision of what kind of data products do we want to build both internally and externally. And it can be incredibly helpful to be able to join in on more of the high level strategy of how can we even ask better questions of our data? Because I think many times people know they want to be using data. They understand at a surface level what we could be using with data, but it helps to have a partner that not only knows your data, but also understands the nuances of your unique business model to be able to drive forward a very unique offering that can be a competitive advantage.
For those who are older movie buffs, the Jerry Maguire "help me help you" line, that is, I think, ringing true here. If someone does want to have an outside person, it's great when they can bounce ideas off them, when they can say, look, you've encountered this many times. So even though these are all unknowns for us, they're not for you as a provider. You've seen this countless times. Tell us at our maturity stage what it would take for us to make it to the next stage. If people want to get in touch with you or go check out and see for themselves some of the examples, how to make this embedded data and operational data analytics work for them, where would you send them?
Yeah. So be sure to check out our website at godatadrive.com, godatadrive.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn and happy to exchange contact information and message on LinkedIn.
Luke Komiskey, thanks again for coming on and for giving people more insights into how they do their marketing so they can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.